Firstly, thank you to Helena and EONS and my fellow presenters for letting us come here. We only finished this research a couple of months ago, so we were quite late to the party, but we were really glad to finally get it over the line. So as Helena said, the European Biosafety Network's partnered with the German Oncology Society for Nursing for this study. But a quick overview of the EBN. So we are an independent network, and we are the sum of our parts. We're a collective network across Europe, from European organizations through to national organizations, trade unions, and anyone involved in healthcare worker safety. Our singular mission is to improve healthcare worker safety, and for many years we've had a specialism in oncology and protecting specifically oncology nurses from hazardous drug exposure. A quick note as well, we're just waiting to hear back about publication of this new research in a scientific journal, which would be especially significant for us. I also believe it's the largest study of its kind, especially since 2022 and the introduction of the new regulation around exposure. A quick disclosure, the product was conducted by the EBN in partnership with the German Oncology Nursing Society. The management of the project was funded by industry, EquiShield. However, the study itself was independently designed, implemented, approved by the KOK, and we also had the study peer-reviewed with non-commercial oversight by two additional independent experts before it went to field. The authors of the study, by the way, are Professor Patrick Jahn, who you may have heard speak today from the KOK, myself, and our public policy researcher, Loic Fremont. So just a quick overview to show that we've been doing this for a while. This is as an EBN summit in the Polish Parliament, which we hosted with collaboration with the EFN, talking about exposure. That's over 10 years ago. To skip forward to this year at Safe Cancer Care and OncoSafe in in Romania in May. Why was the study important? And I think my fellow speakers have covered this extensively, but oncology nurses are among the most exposed professionals to cytotoxic agents and cytotoxic drugs. They're carcinogenic, they cause cancer, they're mutagenic, they mutate genes, and they're toxic to reproduction. The drugs under the newest EU regulation are now classified as hazardous medicinal products, HMPs, and now we have a definition of HMPs which is in place throughout Europe. It's long-term, low-level exposure to nurses. Obviously targeted exposure, these drugs are used for a reason, but we're talking about nurses who often are working with these drugs for many, many years, often over a decade. The regulations exist, but the implementation of that regulation is inconsistent. A quick look at the regulation. So the CMRD, which is the Carcinogenic Mutagenic Reproductive Directive, was updated in 2022, amending the directive from 2004. The key changes were inclusion of HMPs, including reprotoxins in the scope of this directive, a clear definition of what an HMP is, and you can follow that definition to see if the drugs you're using are hazardous. With a list, we worked with the ETI to produce a list of those drugs and a requirement for training of people handling those. My colleague here has already looked at the hierarchy of control, so I won't spend too long here. But the point being, before you even start talking about PPE, you should be talking about how you can isolate people from the hazard with engineering controls and administrative controls. Specifically, that HMPs should be manufactured, administered, disposed of, all within a closed system. And our objective is to get exposure to zero, not just to limit exposure, but to try and aim for zero exposure throughout that life cycle. So now moving on to the study. The methodology was to partner with the KOK and a few key stakeholders, and we used a survey on Sousa. We were aiming for 500 responses, and we were able to secure over 1,000 within 3 months. I'm overwhelmingly pleased with the response to the survey. It was a voluntary survey, and we used various data analysis to go through the results. The purpose was to assess how oncology professionals in Germany handle cytotoxic substances in practice, and really to identify gaps in training, institutional safeguards, and that impact the safety of it. We believe, as the EBN, despite the updated guidance from the EU and despite EU regulation and being transposed into national law, that there's still a huge gap in implementation. So in hospitals across Europe, the guidance is not being adhered to, and we hope that this research represents and demonstrates that. We hope that the results of the survey will shape occupational safety implementation of the revised regulation, adoption of LIST, and broader harmonized standards across Germany. So let's have a look at the results. Most of the respondents were female, working in oncology wards across Germany. Every single respondent classified themselves as an oncology nurse, and interestingly, most were over the age of 50, which also meant that most of them had been working with these drugs for over 10 years. We found some really interesting points in the data about the length of time that people have been working with these drugs, because the guidance and training that they would have got 10 years ago is very different to today. And I'll get on to why that's interesting in a second. Quick overview of the demographics. As I said, most of them were over the age of 50. They identified as oncology nursing staff. 72% work in inpatient settings, which is common in Germany, and there's a gender imbalance, which is important to note because of the reproductivity of these drugs. We asked if they were familiar with the current guidelines in Germany of handling and safe administration. While 58% said yes, it's very worrying to see that 40% either said no or I don't know, which clearly shows a gap in awareness, education, and training. Is there an easily accessible list, which you should be able to know that the drug you're handling, you should be able to immediately check whether it's hazardous or not in your workplace setting? And again, about 40% of people said no, I don't know, or that no list exists. A quick look at the overview of the training and guideline data trends. While some said that they are familiar with current guideline practicing, again, there's a huge gap in awareness. Just a quick side note, I think that the awareness of the issue is just as important as improving the regulation around it. I think that there's a huge gap in awareness, education, and training across Europe still to this day. And that's why it's important that we have presentations like these from my colleagues and the platform with EONs and UCONs and similar, just to inform people that the drugs that they're handling every day are toxic. This is an interesting look at what protective measures people used. As you can see, the majority are using gloves. Shocking to see that 7% aren't using gloves. All the way down through to the use of closed systems, which was about a third of respondents. Medical monitoring, Karen went through some wipe sampling, but you can use wipe sampling or biological monitoring to check for exposure. This is where there's a huge need for testing in hospital settings. Without the evidence base, it's very hard to push for improved regulation without knowing whether there is exposure, as you saw those charts from wipe sampling. Here's a look at where what measures in your facility are used when preparing cytotoxic therapies. I know that most people are experts in this room, so I don't need to go through this. Here we had just a look at, there's obviously a broad range of closed systems available. A standard Lure lock connection is a closed system when it's not unplugged and plugged back in, but we know that happens quite often. And then additional protective components with mechanical barriers. Again, there's a range available which are safer. This is where this is the point that we're trying to get to about leakage. Even with the best safety equipment, people still make mistakes. We know that there is a huge understaffing issue across Europe. Nurses are overworked, and they might be seeing tens of patients every day repetitively, and mistakes are made. Here you can see that only 16% of people said that they never have leaks, which means that you have about just under, that are experiencing leaks, whether it's rarely, occasionally, frequently, or they don't know, which is the most concerning. If they don't know that there are leaks, all of those are dangerous. Have you ever experienced any symptoms? So again here, I'd like to point to the I don't know, which is quite worrying. I think that again shows a lack of awareness and education. People might not even be aware that what they're doing is toxic. They might be experiencing symptoms like headaches, but just thinking something's wrong with them and not realizing it's actually because of their occupational exposure. Again, for people that were experiencing symptoms, the symptoms here that we've already looked at, the skin rashes, headaches, taste in mouth is also very common. But what's really worrying for me is the I don't know. And I think that people are experiencing symptoms without really knowing why or what's going wrong. They just know that something's wrong. A few conclusions from our research. Leaks and exposure are routine. Only 16% of people said that they've never experienced leaks. Out of 1,000 responses. Safety systems are inconsistent, and as we know, even when you do have safety systems, mistakes are still made. Monitoring and testing in Germany is very rare. We think that every oncology ward should be testing regularly, and the results should be nationalized. Training guidelines are almost absent. Symptoms are present and underreported, not just underreported, but probably misunderstood as well. And on-site preparation remains common. Here's a cross-tabulation that we thought was quite interesting, which showed that the majority of spill frequency is happening with nurses who've worked for 10 plus years, which makes sense because they'll be handling the drugs for a longer period of time. But it's also coming back to what I said at the beginning, when you speak to nurses who've worked for 10 plus years, they believe that they're working to a gold standard of limiting exposure, but actually those guidelines have changed, there's new evidence bases, and there's new devices or new methods that can reduce exposure further. Some conclusions. Professionals that had only been working for a couple of years reported less spills than those working with the drugs for longer. The spill risk was persistent across the full career spectrum, and the majority of spill incidents are reported by respondents with 10 plus years of experience. We're hoping to have this published in a journal in the next couple of months, following which we're going to do a big dissemination campaign, hopefully partnering with EONs and UCONs and whoever will help us share the awareness of this study. The European Biosafety Network uses research like this to help us work to improve regulatory standards. I actually think the CMRD is quite robust and it has clear guidelines, the European guidance for handling these drugs. But it's research like this, and it's also anecdotal evidence that we find that we know that it's far from it in actuality and practice. There are thousands of nurses who don't even know that the drugs they're handling are hazardous, let alone implementing rigorous controls to prevent exposure. Thank you.
So.